Hello and welcome to this, our final class in the book of Ezekiel. We're now looking at lesson 13. This covers the last 8 chapters of the book of Ezekiel as God gives Ezekiel one more massive vision of things that were to come. According to the timetable, as we look at question 1 in our workbook, it says, what is the time period for the last section of Ezekiel in chapters 40 through 48? But whenever we go to chapter 40 and looking at verse 1, it says, in the 25th year of our captivity, in the beginning of the year, in the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after that the city was smitten, in the selfsame day, the hand of the Lord was upon me and brought me thither. This would have put the writing of this, or the actual vision delivered to Ezekiel, this would have gone to him in April of 573 BC, the 25th year of their captivity. In question 2, it says, how do Ezekiel 37, 26 through 28 and chapters 40 through 48 complement each other? Well, in the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, and going down to verse 26, it says, moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will place them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. And that's what chapters 40 through 48 is talking about. It's this spiritual temple that God is going to reveal to Ezekiel, that's going to be measured precisely and described in detail for several purposes that we'll note a little bit later in the lesson. In question 3, it says, how does the mysterious tour guide use the flax line and the reed as he leads the prophet through the various parts of the temple? Well, over and over again, he measures these rooms. He measures the windows. He measures the walls. He measures everything and gives dimension to this temple and the many rooms and sections of it. And all of that's recorded at length going through these chapters in the book of Ezekiel. In question 4, it says, what are the 3 chief concerns of the prophet as he recounts the tour of the temple? Well, the first of those is that he sees in one of the visions, he sees God dwelling again among his people. He also sees that the people are to sustain their relationship with God by the proper observances, and details are given about the sacrifices that are to be offered. And then there is also the assurance that the wicked and faithless will be gone, and that peace and harmony will prevail. In these chapters, the prophet sees the glory of God returning to this temple. He sees extensive instruction given about the sacrifices that are to be offered and who it is that is to be offering those sacrifices. And we also find that the wicked and the faithless are just not there. Everything is peace and harmony. It is as idealistically put as God could give it to this particular prophet at this particular time. In question 5, it says, name 2 of the most memorable features of this temple. Well, in chapter 43, there is a very grand imagery here of the Lord's glory returning to this temple. Beginning in verse 1 of the 43rd chapter, it says, and afterward he brought me to the gate, even the gate that looketh toward the east. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east, and his voice was like a noise of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory. And it was according to the appearance of the vision which I saw, even according to the vision that I saw when I came to destroy the city. And the visions were like the vision that I saw by the river Chebar, and I fell on my face. And the glory of the Lord came into the house by the way of the gate, whose prospect is toward the east. So the Spirit took me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house. And I heard him speaking unto me out of the house, and the man that stood by me. And he said unto me, Son of man, the place of my throne, and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever. And my holy name shall the house of Israel no more defile, neither they, nor their kings, nor their whoredom, nor by the carcasses of their kings in the high places, in their setting of their threshold by my thresholds, and their posts by my posts, and the wall between me and them. And they have defiled my holy name by their abominations, and that they have committed. Wherefore I have consumed them in mine anger. Now let them put away their whoredom, and the carcasses of their kings far from me, and I will dwell in the midst of them forever. Thou son of man, show the house to the house of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and let them measure the pattern. And if they be ashamed of all that they have done, show them the form of the house, and the fashion thereof, and the goings out thereof, and the comings in thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the laws thereof, and write it in their sight, that they may keep the whole form thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and do them. This is the law of the house. Upon the top of the mountain, the whole limit thereof round about shall be most holy. Behold, this is the law of the house. So here is the vision of the holy God, as his glory fills this temple, and instructions are given. Another very notable part of this vision is what we see over in chapter 47. For here we're going to see water flowing out from the sanctuary that goes to all of the dry, arid places, and suddenly they spring back to life. In the 47th chapter, beginning in verse 1, it says, And afterward he brought me again unto the door of the house, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward, for the forefront of the house stood toward the east. And the waters came down from under the right side of the house, and the south side of the altar. Then brought me out of the way of the gate northward, and led me about the way without the utter gate, by the way that looketh eastward. And behold, there ran out waters on the right side. And when the man that had the line in his hand went forth eastward, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the waters. The waters were to the ankles. Again he measured 1,000, and brought me through the waters, and the waters were to the knees. And again he measured 1,000, and brought me through the waters, and they were to the loins. And afterward he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass over, for the waters were risen, waters to swim in, a river that could not be passed over. And he said unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen this? Then he brought me and caused me to return to the brink of the river. And when I had returned, behold, at the bank of the river there were many trees on the one side and on the other. And he said unto me, These waters issue out toward the east country, and go down into the desert, and go into the sea, which bringeth forth unto the sea. The waters shall be healed. It shall come to pass that everything that liveth, that moveth, whithersoever the river shall come, shall live. And there shall be a very great multitude of fish, because these waters shall come thither. For they shall be healed, and everything shall live whither the river cometh. And it shall come to pass that the fishers shall stand upon it from Engedi even unto Engedlaim, and they shall be a place to spread forth their nets. Their fish shall be according to their kinds, as the fish of the great sea, exceeding many. But the miry places thereof and the marshes thereof shall not be healed, and they shall be given to salt. And by the river upon the bank thereof, and on the side thereof, on that side shall grow all trees for meat, whose leaf shall not fade, neither shall the fruit thereof be consumed. It shall bring forth new fruit according to his months, because their waters that issued out of the sanctuary, and the fruit thereof shall be for meat, and the leaf thereof for medicine. So here we see all of these arid places now being well watered. Life-giving sustenance is there. The fish, the trees that bear constant fruit. All of the needs are being met. So God has returned to be among his people, and provision will be adequately made for them. In question 6, it says, when was Solomon's temple built, and when was it destroyed? This is not any kind of reference to Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple was built in the 10th century BC, and it was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. Solomon's temple is a thing of the past. In question 7, how did the people who had seen Solomon's temple react when they saw the foundation of Zerubbabel's temple? Whenever the captives were set free and they came back to Jerusalem, they began to rebuild the temple. A couple of prophets had to prompt them to continue with that job, but eventually they finished the temple back in Jerusalem. But when some saw it, they cried. In Ezekiel chapter 3 and going down to verse 12, that point was made. They saw the temple. They saw that there was a structure there, but it was a pale comparison to the one that Solomon had built. We find in Ezekiel chapter 3 and going down to verse 12, then the Spirit took me up, and I heard behind me a voice, a great rushing, saying, Blessed be the glory of the Lord from his place. I heard also the noise of the wings of the living creatures that touched one another, and the noise of the wheels over against them, and the noise of great rushing. And so he hears all of these things going on. And as he thinks about what is there, the people mourn. He sees how stark it is compared to what they had seen before under the days of Solomon. That temple had indeed been glamorous. That temple had shown them so many notable things. There was so much gold. There was so much fanciness about that particular temple. And yet, now they have a new one, but it is certainly nothing to be compared with the one that they had before. Haggai chapter 2 gives us a little bit of an insight into their reaction as they saw the new temple and the plainness of it as compared to what had been there in previous years. Over in Haggai chapter 2 and beginning in about verse 3. Chapter 2 and going to verse 3. It said, Who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory? And how do you see it now? Is it not in your eyes in comparison as it is to nothing? Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, saith the Lord, and be strong, O Joshua, the son of Josedech, the high priest, and be strong, all ye people of the land, saith the Lord, and work. For I am with you, saith the Lord of hosts. According to the word that I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, so my spirit remaineth among you. Fear ye not. For thus says the Lord of hosts, Yet once it was a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, saith the Lord of hosts. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than the former, saith the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, saith the Lord of hosts. So Haggai helps us to understand that there's going to be a reason for these people to rejoice. Things are going to be okay. Things are going to be great. But that's a reference to Zerubbabel's temple, the second temple that stood on this particular mount in Jerusalem. In question 8, it says, Give the facts of Herod's temple and what were the circumstances of its building. So we have the original temple built by Solomon that was destroyed by the Babylonians. Then Zerubbabel comes back and builds the second temple, and it's also on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, but it's far less glorious than the one that Solomon had built. But then comes the New Testament, and Herod sets about making modifications and expanding that temple that Zerubbabel had built. He made it a massive structure, and that's what was in existence during the days of Jesus. It's never referred to as a third temple, but it is a grand expansion. It took some 40 years to build it, but it was a grand expansion of the temple that was in Jerusalem. In question 8, give the facts of Herod's temple and what were the circumstances of its building. Well, it was a greater structure than what Zerubbabel had built. It was a great expansion. Secondly, it took about 40 years to get all of this done. The original Herod that started the process died before it was completed. But there was promise was made, even as we looked at Haggai, that there would be a greater glory in this later temple. And of course, that's going to be the fact that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was able to walk there and to actually be a greater glory in that temple than what had ever been seen before. In question 9, we began to talk about this temple that is described in these last chapters of Ezekiel. And he says, what do the Orthodox Jews think about or view this idea of building this new temple? Their interpretation of this massive structure that's described in these last chapters of Ezekiel is that they expect the temple to literally be rebuilt according to these specifications, and that sacrifices once again will be offered, as is mentioned in the course of this description of what goes on here in Jerusalem. Then another group looks at these same chapters. These are the conservative Jews in question 10. And how do they view the idea of building a new temple? Well, they expect the temple to be rebuilt, but they put the emphasis over on prayers, that prayers replace the animal sacrifices. They see that part as being symbolic, and that prayers are a greater form of worship than the animal sacrifices from days past. In question 11, how do the Reformed Jews view the idea of building a new temple? Well, to them, rebuilding is a very faint option. They really don't see that happening. But what they focus on is the prayers and the holiness of the people. They don't see animal sacrifices being offered here. In other words, they look at this as being a more spiritual idea than the building of a literal building. In question 12, it says, explain the dispensationalist view of the new temple. Well, of course, the dispensationalists are one group among those who embrace the doctrine of premillennialism. And to them, they see this temple being built following the rapture. Once the righteous are taken off the earth and the Jews awaken to the fact that Jesus is the Son of God, then they are going to build a temple in praise to God in Jerusalem, and it's going to be this magnificent structure that Ezekiel has seen in these latter chapters of the book of Ezekiel. In question 13, it says, describe the premillennial view of this temple. Well, to the premillennialists, and there's various versions of their theory on this, but the temple will be built, but it will be shut down by the Antichrist during this period of tribulation. And this is a very difficult time. And then it will be the center of everything whenever the Messiah returns and is triumphant over the Antichrist and establishes his kingdom in Jerusalem and begins to reign for 1,000 years. So there's a lot of things said about this temple that's described in these latter chapters of the book of Ezekiel. But what about the Mormons? What do they believe about a new temple? Well, if you study Mormonism, they believe that the Bible tells the history of God's people over in Palestine, but the Book of Mormon is talking about a group that left there, came to the New World, and was establishing a religion here in the New World amongst the Native Americans. And so they believe that, yes, there's going to be a temple rebuilt in Jerusalem, but there's also going to be a temple built in America. And this is going to be a superstructure for the righteous that are on this side of the ocean. In question 15, it says, summarize the symbolic Christian view of the temple of Ezekiel. And this is pretty much the point that we begin to focus on. That the temple is talked about here as really being the church of today. It's a spiritual entity. It is perfect in its form. It is going to be the house of worship for God's people. The church is that house of worship. It's not going to be a physical structure, but it's making reference to the church, the perfection of it, and the work of the saints as they spread the kingdom of God. We find in question 17, What would you say about the view that some hold about Ezekiel's vision, namely the sacrificial system will be reinstated in a millennial future? Well, Christ was the perfect sacrifice. That's what the Hebrew writer helps us to understand. And the blood of bulls and goats cannot take away sin. Hebrews chapter 8 makes that point very plainly. There's not going to be a need for animal sacrifices. There's not going to be a need for that kind of worship anymore, because the greatest sacrifice of all was made with the offering of God's Son. In Hebrews chapter 8, beginning in verse 9, the Hebrew writer says, going up to verse 8, "For finding fault with them, he saith, Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my law into their mind, and write them in their hearts. And I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord. For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. In that he saith, The new covenant, he hath made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away." So Christ was the perfect sacrifice. And as we look to all that he says about that sacrifice and about the offering of sacrifices in general, he makes the point over in the 9th chapter, beginning in about verse 23. "For it was therefore necessary that the pattern of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ is not entered into the holy place made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Nor yet that he should offer himself often, as the high priest entered into the the holy place every year with blood of others, for then must he have suffered since the foundation of the world. But now once, in the end of the world, hath he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And it's appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. So Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation." So we understand from the writing of Hebrews, that Christ was that perfect sacrifice. He cleansed and made everything right if we will believe and follow him. And then finally in question 18, how does the New Testament aid us in understanding the vision of Ezekiel about a new temple, and cite some passages and illustrations? Well, Paul said over in Acts chapter 17 and verse 24 that God does not dwell in temples made with hands. Ezekiel is not referencing here in these last chapters to the building of some physical structure, but rather he's talking about the church. He says we are his temple. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, going down to about verse 19 beginning, the Apostle Paul makes that point as he is talking to the Corinthians and helping them to understand that Christ dwells in us. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and going down to verse 19, Paul says, What? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own? For ye are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. And then Peter also talks about us as Christians, and talks about us being part of that spiritual house, that we are those lively stones that are built together for the habitation of God. Over in 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 3, he says, If so ye have tasted that the Lord is gracious, to whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious, ye also as lively stones are built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ. Wherefore also it is contained in the Scripture, Behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect and precious, and he that believeth him shall not be confounded. Unto you therefore which believe, he is precious. But unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner. So we see that this last section of Ezekiel is spiritually imparting to us the understanding of the coming of the greatest temple of all, the church, and our part and our role in that. That the glory of God is found in the church. We are to make known to the world the manifold wisdom of God, and to help them understand his might, his majesty, and his glory. So those prophecies were all pointing to what happened beginning in Acts chapter 2 and thereafter, with the establishment of the church and the spread of it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this study in the book of Ezekiel. There's been a lot of heavy material, a lot of visions that we've looked at, but it's all been designed to help the captives understand and remember one day they're going home. But as they go home, it's not going to be just the wonder of getting back to the city limits of Jerusalem. But God made a promise of a great restoration, that one day the Messiah, the Redeemer, would come, and a greater kingdom would be established that would cover the whole world, that being a reference to his church. Now, many didn't get that spiritual kingdom that was going to be established later, and the New Testament articulates all of that for us. But the work of Ezekiel is magnificent in helping us to understand the plan of God, and when we put that with the New Testament, we see the fulfillment of the plan of God. Well, I hope you have enjoyed our study in Ezekiel, and we hope that you'll look forward and continue to study with us as we soon then move into our study of the next Old Testament book, and that will be the study of the book of Daniel. Thank you for joining.